We are kind of running a little bit behind schedule, so I'm going to keep it nice and short, and I'm going to introduce Peter Gillis of Learnovate, who's going to be talking about nudges in learning. Peter, thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I hope you're enjoying it. I think it's great. I think what we're seeing is a great mix here, which is kind of unusual for these conversations, in that we're talking about the bigger and the smaller aspects of learning tech and ed tech. So I'd like to take it in a little bit tighter and just to look at some of the research we're carrying out in the centre at the moment. They also didn't give me a lapel mic so as to strap me to the podium, stop me moving around much. So, you've probably all heard nudging at some level or other. And realistically, I have those two shiny rings up there because ed tech and learning tech are no strangers to being attracted to shiny objects, micro-learning, AR, VR, etc. And nudging is certainly emerging into this space too. What I want to do today is just give you a taster, because it's quite a large area and it comes from the whole area of economics. In terms of nudging, and just to maybe tease out, has it got potential for us to use in our daily lives, or is it more fad? Just to recap on my own journey, I've spent a couple of decades in the communications and multimedia industry. More recently, I've spent a fair bit of time now in research and in technology-enhanced learning. And underpinning it all, I've spent about 15 years now studying and lecturing in psychology. Now, they sound fairly eclectic, but behavioral change is kind of at the heart of all of these things. And anybody who knows me will have heard me say before that I always thought it was a little bit harder in communications and multimedia, because to bring about that behavioral change, I couldn't put people in a classroom and say, please do this or please do that. You have to stop them first, grab their attention, and then hopefully persuade them to make the choice. Now, if you just understand that pure difference, you're a long way to understanding what nudging's about. Okay? First, just want to go back and look at before nudge. So before nudge, economic theory, and as I've said, nudging really comes from economics. Economic theory said we had evolved as Homo economicus. And then the lights went out. The robots have taken over. We don't need lights anymore. So Homo economicus was the idea that as humans, as a race, we weigh up the pros and cons of any decision that we're going to make, and then we do what serves our needs best, what serves our utility. And this is the basis on which most economic theory was developed. And indeed, those of you who'd be familiar with the Baz Luhrmann line about trust me on the sunscreen, you know, the benefits of using sunscreen are undeniable, and most people will follow that behavior. But there are other behaviors that cause us problems for Homo economicus. We do things that are not rational. We have habits, as Celine talked about, that are not good for us, and yet they're embedded and we stick with them. So this brought about the need for a different thinking on economics. And these four labels here on the left, I'm just going to talk you through, because again, I think an understanding of these gives you a really good idea of where nudging is coming from. So behavioral economics, and if we take the two words there, behavioral, or the study of behavior, it's the interaction of psychology and economics. And what we're saying there is that individuals are not completely rational. They don't make every decision by weighing off the pros and cons. They're full of emotions and motivations, momentary intentions, etc. And they also operate within a context, an economic context. Where are they at that moment in time? What are their needs? So all that means that realistically, the idea that the race make this black and white decision was flawed. Hence the emergence of behavioral economics, if we can understand individuals and how they behave. Thaler and Sunstein have come up with this idea of liberal paternalism. And they say by knowing how people think, we can make it easier for them to choose what is best for them, their families, and society. No small call, huh? Now, as you can see, it gave me a bit of a surprise the first time I read it. And it's that idea of we. Who's the we that's going to decide for me what's the best thing for me to do? But before we get too deep into that, let's just move on, because I'll address it in a couple of slides. And again, this is a graphic that's used quite a lot in terms of showing what a nudge might look like. First thing to notice is that it's not a message. It's not a text message or words. It's just the environment has been changed around. And if you think about what the nudge is doing here, it's operating at two levels. First, you want to probably feel good if this is in your workplace and sort of, yeah, I'm taking the stairs. But also, if you go to take the elevator, you hope nobody sees you, because the environment's been designed in such a way that it's kind of not really good, yeah? And that brings us on to the choice architecture. That there is the choice architecture being redesigned. So it is the design of different ways in which choices can be prepared. I'll hammer this word design a lot because it's really the difference between just sending out a message or putting a sign up. It's the design, it's the conscious design leveraging psychological insights to see if you can bring around choice change, yeah? I was trying to think of an example for you, and walking through Trinity all summer, the playing fields had turned to hay up there. I mean, that fantastic summer we had literally incinerated the pitches up there. And during the period of repair, I noticed this sign went up. Pitch reseeded, keep off. Now, if nothing, it's pretty clear, but it's not a huge amount involved in choice there, yeah? It's more like a direct order. Potentially, when I was thinking about it, maybe they could have gone for something like this. Keep your team on the pitch, give our grass a chance to grow. So the first thing that might do, and by the way, it was never tested, I'll have to talk to the provost, but what it might do is get that collegiality feeling going, that I want to, yeah, I'm part of Trinity, and hey, go team. But it might also, to those people who don't have any association with Trinity College, what it might do in their instance is sort of say, geez, this place cares. I think I'll stay off the grass. Big difference is with the sign above that you will make a choice. You'll make a conscious choice to actually do that, yeah? So that brings us to nudges. And this is what a nudge is. It's an intervention that preserves the freedom of choice, but nonetheless gets the job done, okay? So there is that kind of aspect to it, that realistically, if it isn't getting done what you intended it to do, all you're doing is giving choice. So a nudge has to have a desired outcome that is achieved. Why? Because humans can be irrational, we are motivated by choice, and the choice architecture can be designed to guide people. Now to go back to that sign again in Trinity just for a second, the sign was going up anyway, so why would we not design it to be the best it can be in terms of delivering A, the message, and B, making people feel good about that in themselves as well. Young, and as I say, this is the research project we're carrying out on behalf of our members, so a lot of my talk is focused on the existing research that's out there. And Young says, listen, hang on, with access to all this big data out there and profiling of people, and I suppose, we have had recent incidences with the likes of the Facebook scenario, etc., that it becomes an instrument of control, operating as a potent form of nudge. But even in all these scenarios, realistically, we're going to deliver messages one way or the other. How we might segment people, yes, I do agree, is a challenge for big data and people's rights to control how they're being profiled. But the actual delivery of the message itself, not so much. And there are problems for nudges because it does, liberal paternalism. I have a choice, but you're telling me what the choices are. So there is a conflict there in terms of the phrases that are used. And to some extent, it has to be covert. If the little sign I developed for the Trinity thing said at the end of it, by the way, this is designed to keep you off the grass, it kind of loses its impact. Yeah. So there's a covert aspect that needs to be there. And if it's covert, is it open to accountability and transparency? But Van der Heyden and Coaster say this, that, it's just another governance strategy. It's another tool in the toolbox. That's really all it is. And again, don't forget that they're talking from an economic perspective. And if we look at learning and education, in the education space, we have teachers running classes, we have L&D running courses and engaging with learners on a constant basis. This is another tool in the toolbox. And realistically, just to stop here for a second, it isn't any shiny object. It's realistically just a pragmatic use of psychology to understand what the motivators and what the challenges that your learners are facing and see if you can, as the word implies, nudge them on a bit. Yeah? So you might think you're doing it already. Maybe you are. Maybe you're sending out reminders. Maybe you are actually putting up all those posters, etc. But I go back to my idea of the word design. And again, to refer to what Owen mentioned earlier on, nudges sounds like a solution, but it has to address a problem. So the design means a full understanding of the problem that you're facing, and then producing something that is targeted and designated to answer that specific problem. If you are, during the course of this research project, I'd really, really would love to hear from you, from any examples you have. And speaking of examples, Barry Murphy is unfortunately in the United States today at the Degreed conference, but I believe we've some Airbnb people in today. And I was speaking to Barry during the week and he said, no problem sharing this. So Barry experimented in terms of the reminders, I should say Barry and his team, experimented with the reminders that they send out to engage people. And after a fair bit of experimentation, he found that golden time, 9:30 local on a Monday morning. Now his theory behind that, which is further to be worked on, is the idea that you have a week ahead of you, you're facing into it, you're feeling up, the coffee's in hand, and you've settled down at the table. Good time. Yeah? Great idea of a nudge. And a great idea of a nudge not being around the words being used, more being really just about, again, the choice architecture and how do you design it to have best impact. If any of you were at Learning Technologies earlier this year, David Perring, the Director of Research at Fosway Group, gave a half-hour-long, really interesting speak on nudges. Now, I think the fact that Learning Technologies dedicated a half hour to it shows you that this is emerging as something of interest in the L&D space. And David made two real main points, and his full talk is up there on YouTube. I'd encourage you to go look at it, and the link at the bottom of these slides is to a PDF of his presentation. And it's a very interesting take on it. What he says is realistically, the focus when you hear something like nudging is, yeah, let's nudge the learners. But that the bigger opportunity is nudging the entire community involved in the learning process. And to use the plasma example on the right, so to learn, you can probably get them into the room and teach them. And again, a little bit back to Celine's point of how much of that's going to go back to the desk, as L&D well know. The nudges probably are most potential in the full turn of the cycle and with all those engaged in the learning process. Leveraging further research he's done, those middle two, less than a third look at sustaining learning after the event, and more than 55% consistently measure learning progress. Yeah? So this is from Fosway's own research, and they're saying this is where the opportunity is immense. This is where nudging, and realistically, I hadn't heard Celine's talk before she gave it, but this all goes back to that. If you want to help everything Celine's just talked about along, well, then there's potential within nudges just to help that process happen. With regards to education, Europe's actually produced and commissioned a report looking at specifically nudges in education. Damgaard and Nielsen did the report in 2017 and produced a further report in 2018 looking at 122 different nudging interventions at the education level. Now again, back to the idea of we like to look at problems, not solutions. Well, these are the problems. Self-control, limited attention, laws of aversion, default bias, etc., social and self-image, and biased beliefs. These are learning issues that were uncovered during this process. And briefly, they broke it down into 5 categories. And as I said, I can only really give you a taster here this morning, but to mainly just give you an idea of how they look in action. So there's 5 categories. So there's the non-educational. Nudges that are nothing to do with the specific educational material. So it's how you frame it, what defaults you might set in the choice architecture, or how you might manipulate a peer group. One example is the idea of the opt-in, opt-out. And in this particular instance, the rates were like 96% maintained usage of the app over the year versus 8%. And it was the opt-out group who have obviously had the much higher usage. But they did use it. So it wasn't a case that they just were lazy and didn't actually. So it had an impact, had a direct impact, a very simple change. And most of these nudges tend to be that way. they are low cost and tend to be sort of easy enough to do. It's the thinking behind what goes into them is what makes them effective. Another thing you'll find across these is some of these have figures that are kind of dramatically effective. In fact, I was running through them with Ian, my colleague, yesterday, and we decided to take them out because in some way they sound incredulous. They work because they're hitting at that psychological level. That's why they're resonating with a problem people have, and therefore they're effective. Situation specific, so understanding a person where they're at, meeting them where they are at. And in terms of setting goals, experiments around the idea of, do you set goals around performance or do you set goals around task? Much more effective to set goals around task, because again, performance can be that bit further out and you can kind of say, yeah, I'll be grand, I'll do fine. But the other one's got much more sense of commitment to it, so it's a much more effective one. Educational. Again, I was saying to Selena as she was coming off stage, it was like a primer in some ways, because this idea that you don't bring back everything you hear at every educational intervention. Help people out, meet them, provide them maybe with the salient important pieces of information through nudging, or give them actual personal assistance, one-on-one assistance where they may be failing, or boosting, equip them with the actual, to use the term, soft skills that they may need to get through. So again, an instance of 8 steps to goal setting was a one-off intervention, and just to differentiate it from the previous slide, this wasn't about setting a goal, it was about how to set goals. Again, long-term effectiveness of the intervention. Social extrinsic, social comparison. Teach for America basically included this one line into an email that was offering people roles with Teach for America, which is a not-for-profit where you give up 2 years to go and teach in underprivileged schools. The inclusion of that one additional line had a significant impact on the amount of people signing up and maintaining long-term commitment over the 2 years to the course. Psychological, looking to address in at that deeper psychological aspect. And again, the one sample here is the idea that females entering into third-level engineering, male-dominated world, they feel very uncomfortable in that space. And the intervention was around saying, hey, you're not the first to do this, and bringing in past student testimonials to help them through. Once again, massively significant improvement in terms of both GPA and self-esteem. Very briefly again, just to say how one looks. So this is one using an email, and they combined information. They said last time you logged in was, but then they also actually said your classmates were on yesterday, and they spent on average 50 minutes on the LMS. So significant increases, 0.24 standard deviation increase. Didn't necessarily dramatically increase the amount of study time, but it brought back week time study by 2 hours, so maybe people were fresher. And the hypothesis that's been developed now is that actually what the nudge did was increase the quality of the study more so than necessarily the actual hours spent studying. My current PhD, been at it 3 years though, Vinny might be in the room, working hard, Vinny, is focused on using nudges as a tool. And in addition, we're doing a core research project in the centre for our members at the moment. And what we want to do as a data, as a technology-driven centre, is to look at how we might model out identified behaviours that leave data trails that can in turn lead to nudges, that can in turn lead to short interventions, and eventually on out to behavioural outcomes. As I say, this is something I'm specifically working on in the area of third-level motivation myself, but also in addition within the centre. So just to finish out, nudges are the design. I come back to that. It's not just bang out a message. That's just not going to work. And by the way, during Damgaard and Nielsen's research, their graveyard is full of the ones that didn't work too. Yeah, so I didn't think you'd have much interest in them, so I showed you the good ones. But there are any amount that don't work. So it's about that design, and it's for learners. So it's about design, learning, and psychological context, which means my skill set may not be that far removed from what I need to do. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Peter. So I am definitely not going to mention the hashtag Learnovation again, definitely not. But I do have a bit of an intervention of my own. We're going to use that situation-specific intervention. I'm going to give you a deadline. I'm going to give you a goal, and then we're going to give you some reminders. The deadline is 11:40. The goal is to go and get coffee, and our reminders are going to be nudges physically when we need to get you back in. So thank you very much.